Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Oliver Money-Kyrle. I'm the head of European Advocacy at the International Press Institute, and this is an event organised and hosted by the Media Freedom Rapid Response, which is a coalition of media freedom organisations, including the International Press Institute, the Osservatorio Balcani Caucaso Transeuropa, Free Press Unlimited, the European Federation of Journalists, Article 19, and it's a consortium led by the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom. This is a project that is funded by the European Commission in order to promote media freedom and journalists' rights across European Union member states and applicant countries. Together, MFRR we organise extensive monitoring of media freedom violations, and we post them on the Mapping Media Freedom website. Just tap in Mapping Media Freedom website and you will see an assessment of, for the last 5 or 10 years, of media freedom violations all across Europe. We use these to organise advocacy and campaigns on individual cases, but also we coordinate advocacy to improve legislation at both the European Union level and in member states. We also have an extensive fund for journalists, which includes legal support for journalists, but also practical support for those who are in trouble. And if you want more information about that, you can visit the Media Freedom Rapid Response website. Now, as part of our extensive range of activities, we also organise fact-finding missions to member states to assess the media environment for journalists. In the last few years, we've organised missions, I think most recently to Bosnia, to Greece, to Poland just before the elections in September, before that to Slovakia, to Turkey, to Malta, Hungary, Slovenia, Italy, and even the Netherlands 2 years ago. This January, we decided to organise an online mission to Romania, during which we met with a full range of journalists and media stakeholders. So why Romania? Well, as we know, globally, it's a super election year. But in Romania, it is a super election year with 4 different sets of elections scheduled to take place over the next 8 months. And we wanted to examine the state to which the media is ready to take on probably what is the greatest challenge that they face in journalism is their ability to report on election campaigns so that the public can be properly informed and in a position to make informed choices at the ballot box. Moreover, as part of our monitoring advocacy, we've also been picking up, in the last couple of years, we've been picking up an increased number of SLAPP cases of vexatious lawsuits against journalists. We've taken up smear campaigns. There's the well-known journalist Emilia Sercan, who has for the past 2 years been targeted by a pretty horrendous politically driven smear campaign. And we've also been following up issues about disruption in newsrooms over editorial independence. For many of these reasons, we decided to organise the online mission to Romania. Today, we are presenting our report and taking the opportunity to discuss the issues in depth with a fabulous panel of Romanian journalists, activists, and researchers. So these include Septimius Parvu, who is the elections and good governance expert from Expert Forum, a public governance think tank, part of the Open Government and Partnership initiative that seeks greater transparency around government action. We have Cristina Lupu, who's the Executive Director of the Centre for Independent Journalism, which I think is probably one of the longest lasting civil society organisations focused on media freedom and media developments in the country. We have just been joined, welcome Anna, we've just been joined by Anna Poenariu, who is a very prominent investigative journalist, formerly working with the RISE project and also a member or a cooperating partner with the Organisation for Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And we have Marius Daea, who's come with us. He's been a journalist for some 30 years, originally from Craiova, and is currently representing Free Press Unlimited as their country coordinator and expert on local journalism. To conclude the session, we'll be calling on Sielke Kelner, who's the representative from OBCT, one of the MFRR partners, who's the Research and Advocacy Officer. The panel, like the report, is designed to fit into the framework of the three key MFRR campaign areas. And that is very simply media capture, which we define as the abuse of political and economic power to control media. The second one is journalist safety, looking both online and offline safety. And there we tie it into initiatives of both the Council of Europe and the European Commission's recommendations to member states on improving a safety environment for journalists. The third main campaign is the legal obstacles facing journalists, and primarily that is focused on the question of vexatious lawsuits and strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAPPs. And then, of course, we'll be taking a deeper delve into the particular conditions that face local journalists. So that's more or less the approach. So we'll start with Septimius. Among our findings on media capture, we look at the weakness of the regulatory authority, we look at the compromised public service media, we look at the growing influence of the betting industry, and we also note the growing vibrancy of some of the independent media that are making increasing inroads into gaining public attention. But the number one key finding of our report, which we think is probably unique to Romania, is that the main instrument of political capture of Romanian media are the media and propaganda funds eligible under the state budgets provided annually to each political party. The size and lack of transparency over their expenditure has created a pliant and clientelist media culture that panders to politicians and fails to hold government to account. Now, Septimius, you're one of the leading researchers in this area, and I'd be grateful if you could give us an introduction to explain what the main problems are, what their impact is on media, and what needs to change. Thank you, Septimius.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for covering Romania. So we start with the interesting subject of money, which I think is not necessarily a new issue to Romania, but I think what's changed is the manner through which political parties are trying to control the media outlets. And what we have noticed is, I will also show you, I would like to show you some of a little bit of visual insights to see how this affects, and maybe just if you allow me to share, please. What we have done is that we are gathering data for a few years, and we have seen that political parties. Okay, so let me show you what you can see is that political parties, on one side, have started to receive, since 2016, 2018, let's say, much more subsidies. What you see here, the graph represents the money that political parties, a few political parties, usually 5 to 7 political parties, receive for results in local and parliamentary elections, but mostly in parliamentary elections. So as in 2008, for example, there was around 1.5 million, most 2 million. And starting with 2016 to 2018, and actually it was much worse after 2018, political parties have started to receive much more money. And the question is, how do they spend it? Our research has shown that this is the manner in which they spend the money. And what you see here, it's almost half. This is 2023. So basically last year, they spent almost half of these funds through media contracts. Officially, it's called press and propaganda, but mostly goes through the media. Because the issue is that the legislation is very poor to regulate the transparency of such funds. So of course there are oversight provisions. There is a oversight body who looks on how these funds are used. They only take into account the let's say the paperwork. So there is no real oversight of what is the real effect of spending these funds. The contracts are not public. So a party can have contracts directly with some, let's say, websites, can have but actually in most cases they go through consultancy companies. And the reason is that consultancy companies are kind of let's say, bottleneck, because you don't see where the money goes from the consultancy company. So basically you have maybe 2-3 big consultancy companies per year per party, and they spend money through different other channels. Outside the elections, parties are not allowed to buy, let's say, electoral space or political propaganda space in TV stations, for example. But what they do, they buy or they pay contracts with their websites. For example, the website of a TV station, and of course, in the prime time, the 8 p.m. 8 p.m. TV show, you'll see the same things. So basically, it's an indirect manner of buying this space. On the other side, going back to contracts, some of them are, I understand that they are tagged as commercial secrets, so even the oversight body doesn't see what's inside this contract. There were some leaks, if you want, in the media. So there are some journalists who wrote about it, and basically we have seen that there were TV stations that got up to 100,000 per month. And the question is, what do they do with this money? What do we see for this funding? Last year, for example, in 2023, it was around 25 million euros. So it's quite a lot. If you compare to some commercial companies, I think it's more probably than some of the big commercial companies, what they spend. So we don't know exactly what they spend for, but I think there are two types of outcomes. One is to buy positive propaganda. So basically, and here we talk about the two main political parties, the Social Democrats and the Liberals. So most money comes from there. And secondly, and I think this is even worse, is to stop some news from getting into the agenda. So basically, you are stopping the diversity of news, and you put into this into the lists of topics only what you want. And I think this is very damaging. We have four types. We have four types of elections. Basically, we have them all this year, and we are discussing about the campaign, the election campaign, which is 30 days before the elections. But I think this is irrelevant, because PSD and PNL have already built their image. I mean, if you pay for years for media, and I'm not saying that all media is bought, so I don't want to go into this trap, because I think there are independent outlets, there are newspapers, some TV stations, they are doing their job without receiving money. But I think what will go into the election campaign probably will not even be that important, because the background is already set. The smaller competitors don't have these funds. It's, as I was saying, there are usually five or six political parties who have access. And I think what's and I would also like to highlight that this is not marked. So basically, if during the election campaign, you have very clear regulations on the marking of electoral propaganda, because we are talking about electoral propaganda outside the election. So outside the 30 days before the elections, there's basically a black hole. There's no regulation. And although there is a draft law in the parliament for around 2 years almost, at this point is somehow dead. So probably it won't go. They won't go with it. And according to this law, parties and of course the media outlets would have been required to mark all these materials so that a citizen can understand that this is paid and this is not I don't know, it's not organic. But I don't think there are any chances. Our chance probably will be the new regulation on political advertising, which won't go into force this year. I mean, not what it's important, the marking of material. So probably we'll have to wait for 1 or 2 years. But just to conclude here, also more data you can find on our website, banpartide.ro, where we have very detailed information and this kind of graphs for each party. But I think this is very strong mechanism to control media, to control the public agenda, and I think it creates a very uneven level playing field for this electoral year. So thank you very much, and if there are questions, I'm here. Thank you.
Oliver, your mic is off.
That's a beginner's mistake. Just a reminder to the audience that you can pose questions in the chat. I've got a couple of questions to come back to you. I mean, it seems that the biggest problems are, I suppose, the size of the funds. You talked about 25 million last year. We knew that in 2022 it was around 20 million euros were used for these propaganda and media funds. I assume it's much bigger for this year. There's a lack of transparency so that the public don't know when media is being, or when content is being paid for, which it seems in itself extraordinary given that this is public money as well. So as I understand, the electoral authority that's responsible for receiving reports from the political parties do not make those reports publicly available, which is obviously a problem. There's a more sort of general problem about, you know, if they're paying, you talked about using these funds being used not to pay the broadcaster directly, but to pay the website of it, and therefore those funds being used effectively to change the editorial line or the sort of content in the broadcaster. How much do you think, you talked about the EU's political advertising directive that will come in I think 18 months time, which requires the labeling of all content, but what are the potential risks around that? Or do you think that will solve the problem, or do you think the political parties will still find a way around that?
I think it will probably partially solve the problem. Of course, the oversight body mostly will be also a Romanian one, so it will not be I mean, there are different types of bodies. We'll see exactly who will take care of this. We had a debate on this, and there are no institutions which are very willing to do this. To take over this. I think partially it will increase. I think there will be loopholes probably, and I think it will be very important. As for example, we are monitoring this. We have reports including on social media and how they spend on social media, which is very little compared to TV stations, by the way. So I think it will also be very important to have this kind of watchdog, if you want, and constant. Unfortunately, there are very few journalists who are contesting this, who are asking questions. The leaders of the parties are always saying, "Oh, but I sent you," or but they don't. I mean, there are even decisions of the courts who require them to give this data and they refuse. So they will have to be executed basically with a I don't know, judicial officer or something. So yeah, there is a very strong opposition to do this, but I think the regulation has a great potential to improve this if again there will be also public pressure.
It's great. I mean, look, we may well come back to this subject later. I mean, it's often we talk about how governments misuse state funds to capture media by, you know, directing funds to the allies in the media or withdrawing funds from those who are critical of the media. We have very little data on that in Romania, but we assume that that's also a problem. But I think we're going to come back to that towards the end, because that's a particular problem for local media as well. And there's another interesting, I think would say would be an unusual element of the Romania scene. You mentioned earlier about how political parties spend relatively little on social media, because we find in other countries that increasingly they are directing their campaign funds or their funds away from mainstream media into social media. So that's another interesting element that seems to set Romania apart. Right. Well, listen, I'm going to. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to sort of now turn to Cristina Lupu, who is, as I said earlier, the director of the Centre for Independent Journalism. I believe, Cristina, that you also published your report on the state of media freedom in Romania also today. And I know that you're an expert that you can cover and comment on all of the different issues that we are trying to take on today. But I'd particularly like to turn to you about the question of the safety of journalists in Romania. Now, in our findings, it was very interesting because safety wasn't right up there as a key issue, and yet our sense was it is perhaps an issue that is not properly spoken about. So just to sort of read it out more clearly, our key findings were: whilst most journalists conduct their work without fear for their safety, a significant number of journalists are regularly trolled, threatened, or worse. The most popular targets are, of course, investigative journalists who are exposing corruption or criminal activity, such as illegal logging. And those working in local media or even Hungarian language media are also more exposed. We also know that women journalists are particularly targeted by online harassment and threats. This is common throughout Europe. This isn't particular to Romania, but it is a very clear pattern that we see. And there is a lack of confidence in the authorities to solve the problem, and that this creates a growing culture of acceptance that online hostility is a part of the job. And this, of course, will undermine journalism in the long run. Maybe we could talk a bit about the standout case of immediate search and as well. But I wonder if, Cristina, if you could sort of throw a bit more light onto this, if this concurs with your own findings and what it is that journalists should be doing. Are they blind to this, and is there much more that they can do, or should they just accept the status quo, Cristina?
I think one of the most important things that you said earlier, and it's included in your report, is this idea that the journalists feel they have bigger problems than their safety, and that the threat is not imminent. As you said, we looked into the status of the Romanian media, and when we asked the journalists which are the main issues, the main problems of the profession or the business, safety didn't even enter in the, I don't know, 10 in the 10th position of the list of problems they put, and not because it's not a problem for some of them, especially for the investigative journalists or for the journalists who can't be bought or whose owners can't be bought, and in this way to impose the official agenda or the company, the business agenda upon them. So I think this is a problem, and as your report says, and also it comes also from the conversations we had with the local journalists at the local level, where everybody knows everybody, but their job is even more complicated. The harassment, it's more direct. The attacks are more direct, and we have some cases that didn't manage to enter your report because are very new, and that's a problem because we see coming the elections, and in general the elections bring more money into the media, but also they can bring more cases, more trials, more harassment into the courts, but in the same time they can the elections can come with threats to the physical safety of journalists. And we had two cases in February and early March. Journalists in Ploiești and Craiova were attacked by politicians or people related to local politicians, and this sends a worrying signal because this complicated year, it's only at the beginning, and I feel that's important. And the other problem with safety is that journalists consider that it comes with the territory to be harassed by your public, to be bullied, to be attacked, to be smeared. So in a way, they don't see it as a problem. They feel it's a problem, but they say, okay, I'm a journalist, I will have to deal with this. And in a way, they can't do more than that because the newsrooms aren't prepared to support them. In a lot of cases, there are no policies in dealing with the harassment of journalists. In most of the cases, there is no policy in dealing with harassment of journalists in social media, for example, or cases like that. So is because the media feels this is an invented problem, or because they feel some of the media owners may feel that this is something that doesn't affect the business. It's the safety, it's overlooked, and sometimes I think even us as CIJ do not have the capacity to react in all the in all the situations. And here Liana, who is in the audience at Active Watch, they are more proactive in looking at the attacks on journalists. But I think it's an overwhelming problem within the profession. Doesn't feel they are so complicated to react, but in the same time, the journalists don't feel they have the right to react because there are bigger problems.
Well, yes. I mean, there are other problems. I don't know if there are bigger problems. And we were debating about how we want to present this issue, because neither do we want to overstate the severity of the situation, because Romania statistically is no more dangerous than many other countries, or no more threatening, and yet neither do we want to understate the problem. And it's interesting you say that this has become an accepted part of the job, because I've been involved in this work for 20 years, and it certainly was not the accepted part of the job. But it's something, obviously, with the digital online media, the sort of the growth of online threats over the past decade, which we have seen in the last 3 or 4 years to be spill out from online to actually on the street, which is a very real change in the nature of threats to journalists across Europe. I mean, this is certainly not pertinent to Romania, but thank you.
So I will finish with this. There are two. One of the local journalists with whom I talked from Botoșani, a small in the northern part of the country, said that it doesn't matter what you write. Somebody will attack you, will harass you, will tell you are stupid. And if you are a woman journalist, although there are no studies, but if you look empirically at the comments and what's happening in social media, the harassments are even stronger. And I think it's important to discuss also about the case of Emilia Șercan, which is also related to safety. And here we don't need to add a lot, because I think most of the people know what's the situation. But the most worrying part there was that the signal the Romanian state sent to the journalist and to the society is that it's okay to do that to a journalist. It's okay to put private information about a journalist in the public space, because you will not be punished. And I think that's very complicated and very worrying.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And certainly in the cases that we highlighted in the report, I think 9 out of 10 of them are the targeting of women. And actually, on 2 or 3 of the cases, at the time of the case over the last 4 or 5 years, the Prime Minister, at least on 2 cases, made quite a strong statement in defence of the journalists. Yeah. Against as one well-known Hungarian politician that attacked Hungarian language journalists, and then there was another case involving, I think it was a death threat. Well, threats coming from the judicial, the police training centre. I forget the details of that. But there, the political leadership has actually come out in defence of journalists. But as you say, under Emilia Șercan, this is very clear that the message has been sent out that if you expose or embarrass political leaders, that you cannot expect the police to stand and protect you. Well, thank you very much for that, Cristina. I'd like to now turn to Anna. As we were saying earlier, Anna, you're one of the sort of prominent investigative journalists in Romania. You've been subjected to, I think, at least 2 or 3 different vexatious lawsuits or SLAPPs. So we'd love for you to sort of comment on that. Just first of all, in terms of our own findings, we record that there is a growing pattern of vexatious lawsuits or SLAPPs against Romanian media and journalists. Journalists have mostly expressed a guarded confidence in the courts and they have a strong record of winning their cases. Nevertheless, even after victory, the media are left to cover their own legal costs in addition to the drain on their time and other resources to fight the cases. As a result, we conclude that the threat of legal action can still have a profoundly chilling effect on newsrooms. And I'd be really grateful if you could sort of briefly explain that there's 2 or 3 cases you've been involved in, and then also what the sort of broader impact is of SLAPPs on newsrooms. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for making me part of this. So just to be really short, in 2020, after the pandemics started everywhere in the world, I decided to change my focus, because before that I was looking on politicians and corruption and real estate assets and so on. So during the pandemics, I changed to coronavirus stories, because it was like everybody was interested. So that year, actually, besides the coronavirus, brought me also 2 SLAPPs. The first of it was opened in 2020 at the end, and the second was opened last year. Both stories made impact, meaning that the first one, after we published the first story, the anti-corruption prosecutors opened the case and sent to court the chief of the state company that was involved in our story also. What happened with this case is that a woman that was involved in acquisitions of masks went to court and asked the judge to oblige us to pay around 700,000 euro, claiming that we destroyed her life, that her business is destroyed, and yeah, we should pay for that. It is important to mention that what keeps us safe as journalists in front of this type of trials, these SLAPP trials, is doing fact-checking. Imagine that each sentence from our investigations has behind proofs like, I don't know, official documents, videos, audios, anything that can be considered a proof. So when we found out that the case was opened against us, we just talked with a lawyer and passed all the documents behind the text to the lawyer. The trial took like 2 years, so it went to an upper court where the judge decided to reject again the request of this businesswoman. But later on, so after this first trial ended, there was another one opened by another guy. Also in 2020, when everybody was locked out in the house, we went undercover claiming that we are businessmen, and we were basically diving into the black market of masks and all products for the COVID pandemics. So we went from gas station to gas station to gas station, and we ended up in a house owned by a Chinese person, talking with the son-in-law of one of the biggest mafioso guys in Romania. During these meetings that we had in the gas station, there was this guy Matescu, who at the end of 2023 decided to go to court and ask the judges to oblige us to pay 1.3 million euro this time. So the case is still ongoing. Actually, the first term is this month on the 15th. Yeah, so we have him on tape, we have documents, proofs, but I wouldn't be that sure that, I don't know, the judges will always be on the sides of journalists. So from my point of view, these SLAPP trials are not causing only stress, are also causing, financial difficulties, because a good lawyer, you have to pay the lawyers. They don't work for free, So it causes problems regarding finances, but also what's the biggest issue from my point of view is that they try actually to move your focus from doing investigation into another problem, which is these lawsuits, right? But there's another one from my point of view. At a certain point, I had difficulties in writing and documenting other story, because I was thinking, why should I do this job anymore? Because, it was a sort of self-censorship. Right. So this is what they are trying to do with this type of trials. Even though you have the proofs, even though everything is documented and recorded and so on, they just they just want to bring you down. That's the purpose.
I mean, it's very good to hear you say that. I mean, a certain part of some of those that we met on the mission, they almost expressed too strong a confidence in their ability to win these cases, and therefore it didn't deter them from doing the good journalism. But behind the scenes, clearly, if newsrooms have to invest resources into lawyers and the stress of it, then this is going to make people think twice. And we know that the main feature of SLAPPs, or the main purpose of SLAPPs, is not to win the case, but to wear down your opposition, or wear down your critics. And it was interesting you say about how it's also changed the nature of journalism. I was speaking to some Polish journalists back in September about SLAPPs, and they were saying that they have to be preparing their defense at the same time as they are preparing their story. And it sounds like that's exactly what you have to do. I mean, I'd be interested, at the European Union level, they've just sort of signed off on this new anti-SLAPP directive, which would allow for courts to introduce early dismissals when there's an evidently vexatious lawsuit without merit, that could potentially introduce compensation, and certainly the awarding of costs. Because one of the problems is that it seems that you get to the end of the trial, you've spent the money and you've won the trial, you spend a lot of money on your legal fees, and it's very, very rare that those costs are awarded to the media. So I wonder do you think that this directive could make a difference in Romania?
Well, Romania has really huge issues in implementing European directives, meaning that the Romanian authority are interpreting them as they want. So I'm not the person to be asked about trusting the government, because otherwise I wouldn't be an investigative journalism anymore. So I don't have hope regarding this issue.
Well, if everybody trusted the government, then we'd all be out of a job, wouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly.
So we don't want to encourage that too much. But thanks very much for that. I'm going to sort of pass on to Marius, and I think I get a sense that we're going to go back and address all three of these main issues. So that's what I'd like you to do, Marius, and tell us about how that affects particularly local journalists, because I think we understand from the mission there's a big difference. There's an absolute gulf of difference between journalists working on national media out of the capital and those working in smaller cities or more remotely, that can make them more vulnerable on safety issues. There's less resources to deal with SLAPPs, and of course I'd love you to come back and explain a bit more about the economic factors and the dependency on state funding. So Marius, please.
Hi, hello to everyone. Nice to be with you today. You're right. It's a significant disparity exists between national media based in Bucharest and local media in regions that have experienced a decline in professional standard, independence, and public trust. So local media faces unique challenges that impact the integrity and effectiveness. If we have a problem with mass media in Romania, the biggest one is in local media. I just want to give you few points about challenges faces to local media in Romania. First of all, I believe that in the first place, it's financial dependence of the governmental funds. You need to know that at the local and regional level, 19% of media really heavily are funding from either the local governmental or company closely tied to local governmental services. This financial reliance allow local politicians to influence media content, turning them into vehicle for political or business interest. Other problem, the same important, is limited income sources in local media. We know that smaller market means few alternative income sources for local media. Here in small city, private businesses dependent on local governmental licensing or custom hesitate to advise in critical media, fearing repercussions. Also, the vulnerability for the local journalists in local media are increasing. Local journalists are more susceptible to vexation and losses for powerful actors. Lawyers and judges in smaller community, as we know, may face pressure affecting legal outcome, and also limited resources hide the local media ability to defend themselves even when confident of victory. Also, journalists in local media, they facing threat and intimidation. Local journalists encounter greater threats and intimidation. Corrupted police and lack of support organization exacerbate their vulnerability. And not the last, in the local media, we confront with insecure contract and low salaries. Here, I just want to say that journalists in local media often work with insecure contract, low pay, and inadequate pension and healthcare provisions. This pressure drives skilled journalists away from the profession. So there are many problems. I can put everything in this 7 minutes, but the last one, insecure contract and low salaries, made that the journalist left the profession and goes to the public institution. Many of them work as spokesperson, where they find a secure job with safe salary, and this is very dangerous for media in Romania, and in special in local media.
Thanks for that, Marius. I mean, as it's clear that the economic independence of media is absolutely crucial. You need that before you can have any other kind of independence, and that is included the economic independence or integrity of journalists themselves. If you want good people to go into journalism, there has to be a decent conditions for that. I just wonder, if you could also touch on the European Media Freedom Act. So again, like the SLAPP directive, that has just been signed off here in Brussels at the European Union. And there, I think Article 25 requires that all governments' expenditure on advertising funds should be first of all, there should be full transparency about which media money is sent to a contracts are had. But in addition to the transparency, there should be an open procedure which is non-discriminatory and balanced, so that individual politicians are not able to abuse those funds to direct them to their allies. Now, one of the loopholes in this regulation is that it is only obligatory on governments with a population of more than 100,000. Now, I'm wondering if this law has been sort of transposed into Romanian law, if there's a chance for it to be that obligation to be applied across all local governments, and if you think that this would be able to make a difference in creating a bit more transparency and weakening the dependency between local media and local governments. I see a couple of people shaking their heads, so I'll give Marius the chance to respond first, and then I'll go to Cristina.
Let me don't trust in this, because also now, if we want to know where the money goes, we can ask the authorities. Every time I receive, when I ask of this, I receive it, all the information. We can see where the money goes now. I don't think we need other laws in this moment.
Okay, thanks very much, Cristina. You're keen to get in, I suspect.
Yeah, I am going in the same direction. I feel that this may give the authorities which are in towns a little bit smaller than this with the number of people, the idea that they do not have to obey the legislation. And we have this experience with the whistleblower directive, when the provisions from the international directive were weaker than the Romanian legislation, and the Romanian state decided, okay, we will go with that because this is the minimum we need to do. So I think that's one of the more that's in a way it can be worrying, because as Marius said, at this point, if you are really fighting with them, and as Septimius was saying, that if you sue them, go to court, go with an with an order to obtain the information, it takes years. But at least you can have some strategic cases in asking for information. If they say no and will change the freedom of information legislation to put only the obligation for the authorities from that type of cities, I think that may affect the access to this type of information.
Thank you, Cristina. I think that's always one of the risks about having EU-wide legislation. You're trying to raise standards by applying a minimum, but of course, those who are above the minimum, there is the opportunity for them to use that as an excuse to lower standards. But that's also to do with the national policymakers and the national debate. There's no obligation on Romania government to lower standards, and we should insist that it doesn't. Thank you for posting a link to your report. Now listen, we've got about 10 minutes left. A quick last call to the audience for anybody who wants to pose a question. While we're waiting, I'd like to turn to Sielke, who of course co-organised our mission back in January, just to sort of give us perhaps a little summary of some of the responses that we've had today, and also a list of some of the key recommendations that our report has come up with. And if there's time for questions, and if the questions have been asked, then we will come back to that right at the end. Thank you, Sielke.
Thank you, Oliver, for passing me the floor for the final remarks. We stressed over and over again during this webinar, but also in our report, the importance of this mission, because Romania has going through really a lot of political changes throughout this year. And to be sure, each of the themes that we explored today throughout the webinar, but also in our report, has an impact on reporting of journalists on EU and local and also on national elections. We heard from Septimius the ways in which media capture unfolds in Romania through this opaque allocation of media and propaganda funds that political parties assign to media outlets. The size of this funding, we are talking about 20 million euros per year. And the allocation, combined with this lack of transparency, has generated a media culture that relies on clientelism and really fails to hold accountable those in power. The controlling mechanism that is in place, overseeing the expenditure, fails to make relevant information to the public. And it's actually thanks to some very groundbreaking investigative reporting that in 2021 and 2022, the Romanian public eventually learned about the size and funding allocation to the media. This is why, as a consortium, we call on policymakers to reform the system in order to ensure a full transparency of the use of political funds that must be in line with EU regulations and the most recent adopted European Media Freedom Act. But we also call on individual media outlets to clearly label all the content that was supported by political funds. We also heard about the burden of journalists when facing legal intimidation, from Anna especially, but also from the rest of the journalists that we interviewed in January. We heard about how widespread legal harassment is, targeting especially investigative journalists. I think it is indicative that a little bit over a week ago, there is this Romanian independent media, context.ro, that got targeted by what seems to be a traditional SLAPP, and the compensation damages requested is 3.4 million euros, and the plaintiff is a businessman. However, often those in power, and by those in power, we mean politicians, businessmen, but also members of criminal organizations. Well, often they don't even need to formalize the lawsuit in order to hamper media reporting. A legal threat will suffice most of the times. And even when damages that are requested are not enormous, such as the case of Anna or in the case of context.ro, even when are in the round of a few thousand euros, they can threaten the survival of media outlets, especially of those local independent small newsrooms that don't rely on public spending. SLAPP really pose a serious threat to democracy, and the phenomenon of vexatious lawsuits, combined with this culture of illegal political spending, risk silencing an already limited pool of critical independent voices in Romania. So we call on Romanian journalists and all the segments of the Romanian civil society to join forces and to advocate for a correct and effective transposition of the Anti-SLAPP directive. And we call for legal and extra-legal measures to be implemented in line with the recommendation of the European Commission that was adopted in 2022, but also with the forthcoming Council of Europe recommendations that will be issued in the following weeks. We heard from Cristina on the safety of journalists, and really the case of Emilia Scherken, what's not common, testifies to the intolerance of public figures to investigative journalism and shows how vicious their reaction can be, bringing death threats in some cases, but also widespread smearing campaigns. Kind of practices that also generate questions as to the willingness or independence of the judiciary in addressing the case. Then that Cristina also drew our attention to online harassment and trolling that was reported as really widespread and being almost accepted as an inevitable pitfall of the profession. And this kind of hostile mechanism not only challenges the mental health of the professionals, but risk pushing away those young aspiring journalists that would love to enter the profession, but maybe are fearing that those kind of harassment. This is why we call on the Romanian government to fulfill EU as well as the Council of Europe recommendation when it comes to the safety of journalists. We also heard from Marius about how local journalism faces the biggest challenges because all the obstacles that we went through are exacerbated at the local level. So we really call on local government to abide by the ENFA provisions regarding distribution and transparency, regardless of the size of their population. I would say that all combined, the challenges that we analyzed have been generating this lack of public confidence in the Romanian media. But there's also a silver lining that we encounter throughout our mission, which is despite the many obstacles, so despite the political interference, the legal threat, the threats to the physical online and offline safety of journalists, and there is this vibrant independent media outlet community, and they do refuse the public money, and they produce very high quality media outputs. Anna and Marius are testifying, but also the others that we met to these kind of endeavors. I would just like to finish my remark by zooming out and bridging our conversation to a broader EU discussion. The themes that we explore today reflect the goals of the 2020 European Democracy Plan, which is articulated around the importance of strengthening media freedom and freedom of expression throughout the EU. And here I quote the European Commission when they say, allowing everyone to express their views, regardless of how critical they are towards the government and those in power, is essential. So allowing those views in particularly relevant in these election times, in times of political change. And journalists are public watchdogs, and they play this essential role in facilitating the public debate and delivering information and ensuring that all the citizens have access to a plurality of views so they can go to voting consciously. We need to ensure that journalists in Romania, but really throughout the EU, are put in a position to conduct their job effectively and independently, because at the end of the day, it's a kind of qualitative journalism really ensures public awareness and the resilience of our democracies. And I would end there and probably just remind all of you that our network, the MFRR, but also in what pertains legal threats, also the case, but we work a lot with the Coalition Against SLAPP in Europe, is happy to work with all local stakeholders in order to support you during these times and beyond.
Thanks very much, Sielke. I think it's great that you pointed out that there's some also really good stuff that we found on the mission. It's not our job to talk about the good stuff that's going. It's our job to focus on the problems. But we came across some really brilliant journalists, courageous journalists, innovative journalists. And as I say in one of those key findings, there is a vibrancy which is beginning to make inroads, and that could really make a real change. We've covered an awful lot of issues. It's really difficult to sort of do a deep dive into issues when you've got so much to cover in just over an hour. There is, however, a question. I know we're at 3 o'clock. We're allowed to extend this, and because somebody has asked the question, I would like to respect that. And it's not about any of the issues we talked about. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer to respond to it. If you've seen it in the chat, it's from Veronica Figuera, probably mispronounced that, I apologize, asking, well, looking at the elections ahead, what do you fear about the impact of AI or social media trolls and how that will impact the election? Septimius, you've got your hand up, so I'll turn to you.
I would like to start with the second part regarding the social media. So what I wanted to maybe add from what I was saying earlier, because I said that parties don't spend through Facebook ads and Google ads. Facebook actually is probably the most popular platform, probably together with TikTok, but TikTok does not theoretically allow political advertising. So basically, most money goes through Facebook ads. But apart from what is paid, just to give you an impression, in the first 3 months, parties spend around 600,000 euros. So it's not, I mean, compared to what goes through the traditional means, what we were discussing earlier, it's peanuts. But I think that we should not underestimate the fact that there are very popular personalities, and many of them come from the let's say the less democratic parties, because if you look on the persons who have most popularity on TikTok, for example, I mean not all of them, but many of them come from AUR, which is the right extreme party, and basically these are organic, or of course, what we found interesting, for example, there are many many Facebook pages which are tagged as I don't know, publication or journals or something, but actually they are paid probably by our indirectly. So they are founded by a person who work with them. They do not have, I don't know, the logo or something, but if you look in the content, and they do not invest necessarily too much money, but they invest a lot in terms of many ads. So you see tons of ads with lower sums, but they go everywhere. And actually, I think this was their, and also their leader is everywhere with the phone, you know, so basically I think this is one of the things which you don't see necessarily in Facebook ads paid, but probably they invest money in a consultancy, I also guess. There are some rumors. I mean, we don't have any proof at this point. As this is a meeting of journalists, it's I cannot confirm this, but there are rumors that they have some fishy connections, including with Russia. Actually, there were states, there were officials from Moldova and Ukraine who testified that he met the Russian services. So, I mean, yeah, we don't know. You know, also the topic of foreign financing comes from time to time, but we have no proof. I mean, there is no real proof that there's money from outside the country. So I mean, yeah, I think there are all these kind of pages of personalities which have a very high impact. They have very toxic campaigns, anti-EU, very nationalistic, sovereignist, very conservative, which I think they do represent a danger. But what I would mention here is, and I think this also goes into the bigger picture, is that the main parties are not necessarily better. I mean, it's not that all the extremists are in those parties and the main parties don't have this issue. They have the same issues. They are promoting the same issues through social media. I mean, sometimes members of the government party are more conservative and sovereignist than these smaller parties. So I think, yeah, I think social media. Well, I think, you know, you asked about trolls, and maybe we think of trolls farms from outside the country. Yeah, I think we have this one. Probably we have bought, you know, likes, because I remember there were some cases in which ministers had Vietnamese persons from profiles were from Vietnam. They had tons of likes. So I don't necessarily know if they follow the Ministry of Education. So yeah, I think there is this kind of thing. But if you ask me, I think the worst disinformation, influence, trolling is from national politicians and not from outside. You don't see probably what you see in other countries where you have very visible Russian influence, or from other countries. I'm not saying that there isn't. There is, of course. But I think in Romania, we do a better job. I mean, our political parties do a better job in this sense.
Thanks very much, Septimius, and thank you to Veronica for posing your question. I mean, I'd love to sit here for another hour and talk about this subject as well, but unfortunately, I cannot. We cannot. Our time is up. We've overrun by about 5 or 6 minutes. But look, thank you so much to everyone in the audience who came and to join us for an hour, and of course to our speakers and our panelists for joining us too. Just one last point: we will be coming to Bucharest in June in an effort to hold meetings with some policymakers, and to take up some of the, and of course with the journalists as well, to take up some of these issues again in Romania. So really looking forward to that, and thank you for your time. I'm afraid we have to go.